Hey everyone, welcome to this first talk on Qabalah 101, on the Tree of Life, or the Tree of the Sephiroth. There's a reason I'm doing these talks. It's because a couple of years ago, when I started getting interested in the Qabalah more seriously, I found the same problem when I first ever came across the Qabalah, which was you're suddenly looking at an intense amount of data and history. You're looking at something that just appears stupidly complex, in my own opinion. Maybe others' experiences differed, but I found that when I found some text on the Qabalah, I was thrown too far in immediately. It was often quite difficult to get to grips with the basics, so that you could then head off and do whatever it is you want to do with it. So this talk and the next talk they are the 101. So hopefully by the end of them, or at least the end of this one, I'll stick to this one for now. Hopefully by the end of this first talk, Qabalah 101, the Tree of Life, you'll be able to look at the Tree of Life, the Tree of the Sephiroth, and go, I can understand that now in its structure, in its basics, in how it's laid out, in what each individual part of it is. I get that. Now, I'm not going to be teaching you practical Qabalah. I'm not going to be teaching you how to do stuff with it. That's really not, I don't believe it's really something that you can teach in this sense. You can give someone the tools, you can help them understand the tools and the diagrams, but then if you want to go do your own thing with it, go off and do your own thing with it. That's not my purpose with these. My purpose with both these talks, and there'll be the Tree of Life and then one on the individual Sephiroth, plural, is to basically give you enough that you can go off if you want to, or at least have this feeling that I kind of get what the Qabalah is in that theoretical sense now. So there'll be a little bit on the history of the Qabalah. Then I'll mention the texts that I'm using, which are only 2 of them to keep it in line. I'll talk about the naming conventions and a little bit on gematria, and then we'll go fully into the Tree of Life. If you're listening to this, I would advise searching out the YouTube version because it's diagram heavy, as you can imagine, with the Tree of Life. So let's move in. Let's start with the history. Many of you might be thinking, okay, what Qabalah are you using? Because there's different ones. Let's begin with the history, and then we can move out into where these all come from, very, very loosely, very roughly. Qabalah is an esoteric method. It's a discipline, it's a school of thought in Jewish mysticism. It's where it arises. The Jewish Qabalah is a set of esoteric teachings meant to explain the relationship between the unchanging eternal God and the mortal finite universe. Creator, creation, unmanifest, manifest, ultimate being, down to beings, if you like. This definition doesn't really change. That is still what it is, even within the modern Western esoteric tradition. But the capital T traditional practitioners believe its earliest origins predate world religions, forming the primordial blueprint for creations, philosophies, religions, sciences, arts, everything, basically. It is like the diagram, it's the symbol of symbols. Historically, it emerges from earlier forms of Jewish mysticism in the 12th to 13th century in Spain, some in France. It was reinterpreted during the Jewish mystical Renaissance in the 16th century, and then the Zohar became the foundational text of Qabalah and was composed in the late 13th century. Now, from the Renaissance onwards, Jewish Qabalah and the texts entered into non-Jewish culture, and they were studied and translated by Christian Hebraists and Hermetic occultists. This is the Western esoteric tradition of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, of Dion Fortune, of Aleister Crowley, etc. This is the tradition that I'm dealing with. The reason I'm dealing with it is because, one, listeners of my podcast, that's the tradition that really I've been talking about all these years alongside the philosophy stuff. So, the Western esoteric tradition is my interest. 2, I think that for most Westerners now who are interested in the mystical, spiritual stuff, this would actually be where you begin with the Qabalah. You're not really going to begin with Qabalah, the traditional Jewish Qabalah. You're probably not going to begin with that. You're probably going to understand and hear about the Qabalah in the sense of like, oh, he's in his study in the dark with candles lit, studying the Qabalah, in the Western esoteric sense. And then you'd understand, oh, it comes from there. So it's the Western esoteric tradition of the Qabalah that I'm focusing on. And from that Western esoteric tradition, I'm focusing on two texts within the same lineage. First one is The Mystical Qabalah by Dion Fortune, with a very nice new edition by Weiser. And then the second text is A Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism by Gareth Knight. Now, for anyone who knows their occult and esoteric history, they'll know that Gareth Knight was, it probably is the most well-known student and pupil, not directly of Dion Fortune herself, but of her work, of the Fortune lineage. He is, the most well-known. So both of these are within the same lineage. Knight's book arguably is a vast commentary on the mystical Qabalah and on Fortune's understanding of the Qabalah. So going forward, that means that there is at points, even though I would argue that the structure does always stay the same, there probably is, but in the majority of cases, no one's playing around with the structure of how the tree of life looks and how things flow one into the other, but there are going to be nuances. So if at a certain point you know your Qabalah, but you haven't read these books and you go, that's not how I understand it, I'm trying to constrain myself to this lineage, because otherwise it's just going to explode all over the place, because there are so many different nuanced readings of the Qabalah that I think the first thing to do is to take one, learn that one, and then when you see the others, you can go, I see where you've changed that. To give one example, Fortune and Knight are both reading the Qabalah in their esoterically Christian sense. And for instance, this might seem a bit complicated now, but the Sephiroth of Tiphareth, number 6, for them is a representation, is symbolically is Jesus. Right? It's the contextual logos within their understanding of it. That'll make sense later on. But those are the two texts I'm using. So I'm trying to keep myself within that lineage so we don't fly all over the place. With that said, Fortune does actually mention Crowley quite a few times. I mean, she's a in her day, I think if I'm getting the dates right, 777 by Crowley would have been probably the most well-known Qabalist correspondence document book there was, and so people were fairly fond of that in the day. Nowadays it's become even more expansive. I can't remember the person's name, but there's one that most people go to now. But anyway, I don't want to get neck deep in correspondences here. I personally believe that's something for subjective study, because those correspondences are something that one individual should understand themselves. I'm interested in structure, what it is, and how everything connects. So you go, I've got the tool, now you can go use it. So, with that said, many people who have seen the word Qabalah will go, well, which one are you talking about? Because there's a few. So, Qabalah in the sense of K-A-B-B-A-L-A-H is spelled Q-B-L-H in Hebrew. So, depending on how you transliterate Hebrew through to Roman, and then Roman through to English, is going to change. And the root word is simply QBL in Hebrew. Now, very roughly, but usually is the case, Qabalah with a K, K-A-B-B-A-L-A-H, refers to the traditional Jewish forms of the Qabalah. C-A-B-A-L-A refers to Christian forms of the Qabalah, and Q-A-B-A-L-A-H refers to mystical or Hermetic forms of the Qabalah, usually. Now, with that said, I personally believe, and well, I think it's fairly well known, there is geometric reasons why people would use different spellings of Qabalah. Now, for those that don't know, gematria is closely linked to the Qabalah, and Dion Fortune, I'm in agreement with her, is very reluctant to really comment on it or use it, and I'm basically in the same boat. Gematria, put simply, is the tool to which you will assign a letter a numeric value. So, I don't know, A equals 1, B equals 2, etc., etc. From that, you can then see that if you take a word, such as the Qabalah, or of any of them, and add up the letters, you then have a number, which you can either digit sum reduce, which, if those of you that don't know what digit sum reduction is, if you have the number 18, and you're trying to keep all numbers within the bounds of, say, 10, to relate them to the Sephiroth, you would then go 1 plus 8 equals 9. So if a word equaled 18, it would then be 1 plus 8 equals 9, and you could say it has a relationship with the 9th Sephiroth, roughly. My problem with gematria, and I believe this is Dion Fortune's problem, she does explicitly state this, is that everything has a name. Everything in the known universe has a name. For instance, I have on my desk a pencil sharpener, right? Well, you could perform a geometric calculation of the word or the words pencil sharpener. You go, oh no, this isn't what it equals. But you can say, pencil sharpener equals 84. 84 also equals the angel Uriel. Pencil sharpener has a relationship with the angel Uriel. How strange. It's just, it goes too far, too fast, and you end up becoming, it's an inherently schizophrenic thing, because everything ends up having inherent meaning, which isn't always there. When it's kept within certain bounds, I think it can be useful to a degree. Like when it's kept within the bounds of why you're using different naming conventions regarding the Qabalah. As you could see, each of these alterations of the name of Qabalah would have different digit sum numbers. And so you're beginning from this different symbolic understanding. But, I just personally have never actually found that much practical use for it. And it's a late game kind of thing to use, because you can just end up flying off in 1,000 directions and giving spiritual meaning to a cheese sandwich. You can give spiritual meaning to anything. So that's the naming. As you can see, Dion Fortune, you might think, okay, but you said she was using Christian. Why isn't it the C Qabalah, Cabala? It doesn't always correlate, but they are the averages. This really is a text. The mystical Qabalah, Q, by Dion Fortune, is firmly within the Western esoteric tradition, with the Christian stuff almost added because of her esoteric Christian understanding of things. She's more firmly rooted in the Western esoteric tradition from Mathers and from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So mystical Qabalah in that sense. But that's the main form that we're going to be looking at. Which brings us to the question of, what is it? What is Qabalah? What is the Tree of Life? The Tree of Life, and this is to quote Dion Fortune on page 13, the Tree of Life is an attempt to reduce to diagrammatic form every force and every factor in the manifested universe and the soul of man, to correlate them one to another and reveal them spread out as on a map, so that the relative positions of each unit can be seen and the relations between them traced. In brief, the Tree of Life is a compendium of science, psychology, philosophy, and theology. Okay, so you might still be going, okay, well, what? It's kind of helpful. It's like one of those esoteric quotes. You go, okay, kind of helpful, but what is it? Can I go outside and find one of the Sephiroth? No, it's not. It's not physical. If you go fly a plane, you're not going to suddenly come across Bina or Chokmah Sephiroth in the sky somewhere. They're not literally in this sense. This is I would go from Fortune's emphasis on in most of her works, especially the Cosmic Doctrine as well. And in a way, the Cosmic Doctrine talk that I had with John Michael Greer would be very helpful going into this if you want to pair these. But she emphasizes at the beginning of Mystical Qabalah as well, it's symbols. These are the most simple way to begin and to understand them is the Tree of Life itself is like an symbol comprised of 10 other symbols of how man gets to God, or how man relates to God, how the manifest relates to the unmanifest. And we'll see there in that first quote, every force and factor in the manifested universe, the above, and the soul of man, the below. So as above, we have an above on the Tree of Life, which is Kether at the top, and then a few things beyond that, which I'll get to. And then we can see that it flows down. As above, so below, as above. And so as one, if you were to go into the practical Qabalah, as one works up via the paths, what is really happening there is symbolic or meditations on symbols, or symbolic meditations from each Sephiroth of man trying to ascend symbolically to a closer relationship to God. God, really, with regards to the Qabalah, is less so that sort of cliche monotheistic sense of like this bloke in the sky, and more so God as being, God as unmanifest, God as pure being, the fount of being. That's what you're moving towards through these stages of mediation. One question that follows from that is, well, who made it? Who built the Qabalah? The rabbis would say angels. That is something higher than man built it. Okay, and the holy books, in this sense, so something higher than man built it. It is, in a way, a diagram of, and I will just go forward in a slide to the tree of life that I'm talking about. There is there on the left. So as we come down the tree of life, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we get to Malkuth, which I'll get to these. But that's Earth. That's where we are, in a way, and we go up and up and up towards God. We can see stages of mediation. We can see that as it descends, and I will explain this, but very roughly at this point, as it descends, we can see a crystallization of something firmer or malleable. And, God to archangels, to angels, to man. Okay, so who built the Qabalah? Well, it descends through what we could say a spiritual hierarchy. Okay, but I'll go back to the quotes there. The Qabalist then, okay, we have the diagram, sort of understand what it is so far. It's meant to be a diagram of all forms and forces in the universe, of how things were made, how things became manifest, with of course God at the top, in a sense, but we'll get to that. What it then becomes used for is as a meditation device, mostly. The Qabalist uses symbols, the Sephiroth, and the paths, meditates on them via the law of analogy. How is this one symbol getting to this other symbol? How is this one path? What does this one path mean to move from here to here? Why is it structured that way? What are these three pillars, which I'll talk about? Okay, so before we get into the absolute structure of it, we'll just talk about it a bit more symbolically. So we have this sort of symbolic foundation, so we don't get caught up in going outside and trying to literally climb up some ladder of ascent. The symbols of the Tree of Life are a guide into the unseen. For those of you that have read The Cloud of Unknowing or Meister Eckhart, it's a guide into that dark night, the darkness, the unseen, the unmanifest, the pure being. The symbols of the Tree of Life are inherently, by their nature, relational. Okay, it maps that which is unthinkable. Yet the journey between them allows an approach, a degree of apprehension. So it's almost like, where do I begin trying to form a closer relationship with the fount of pure being, which is God, the absolute, the divine, the above. You say, well, how can you really start anywhere? Because you have to move from the manifest, got a solid desk and I'm sat on the earth. How can I move from the manifest to the unmanifest? And practically speaking, the Tree of Life is our diagram, is our tool to be able to do that. For fortune and for occult philosophy, thought grows out of language. Okay, symbols precede the elucidation. Okay, the Qabalah is thus growing throughout time. It becomes only richer and grows with our own developments and correspondence. Okay, that's a strange thing to think about, but I would actually refer to a paper by Cormac McCarthy to perhaps help people understand that, because I think it's one of the most important papers written in recent times. It's called the Kekule problem, Kekule. You can go look it up. It's free online. And this really relates to what Fortune is saying there, because it's a very odd thing to think about. Thought grows out of language. Symbols precede the elucidation. And for McCarthy, he questions this in the sense of scientific what we call, like, when you have a brainwave, when you have a moment of genius. And these moments throughout time when not just scientists, but visionaries, we could say, have been struggling with a problem, and they go to bed, or something happens, and all of a sudden a symbol, a dream, a moment of like rapture in a way, moment of genius, but a symbol is given to them. So the dream has to work it out for them. They're working on this problem, and the unconscious, the collective unconscious, the astral plane, whatever you want to call it, they're given a symbol which they then work out. And it's this that is happening here. Now, McCarthy's argument is that we didn't, as a species, we didn't have language. Language is extremely new for our species. So before that, we worked with symbols. Right? When we weren't talking, well, the sun was still there, and we would intuitively have an understanding of sun equals life, because rays come down, things grow. Same with water, same with trees, whatever it might be. We worked with symbols before there was language, and so those things are there, and the elucidation comes after. It's not like we're talking, and then we go, oh, we've worked out what a symbol is. We haven't made that. They are there. They are to be revealed. And then they're to be meditated on and revealed in that sense. So in that way, symbols precede the elucidation. This diagram, the Qabalah, is there, right? And so it's that struggle of, we are always battling against language. We are the manifest battling against the manifest, trying to get through to the unseen, the unmanifest. Okay. In that way, the Qabalah is growing throughout time because the symbol is there, and people keep elucidating. People keep meditating on it and having experiences with it and having experiences with God, and they'll write them down. And we have, the Zohar, we have Mathers, we have Fortune, we have Crowley, and we have all the correspondences. The correspondences are insane. You take one thing, you take one Sephiroth, next thing you know, you've got a tarot card, you've got the zodiac, you've got a Hebrew letter, you've got a number, you've got, I don't know, what, you name it, there is a correspondence for it. An element is another one. And this elucidation is going on throughout time, and so the symbol grows. And so for Fortune, what she would understand is that when you meditate on these symbols, it's not like you're on your own. You're not on your own in a way. You have the books, but when you meditate, what you're meditating on is a Sephiroth. You'd usually be meditating on a Sephiroth, which is one of the circles. I'll get to the structure soon. One of the symbols, and because of that history, because of that elucidation and unfolding by others, you are entering into that wellspring. Literally, you're entering into that wellspring of elucidation. And so there is a progression there in that sense. So the tree of life only grows, it only becomes richer, and grows with our own developments, correspondence. As a diagram, as a visual diagram pertaining to the cosmos, it is, as I've said, in relation to the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. Okay, it's a map of the cosmos, okay, the universal mind, the above, of how creation came to be from creator, elucidation in that sense, a spiritual evolution and overflowing in that sense. But the below is the soul of man, our minds. Universal mind, God's mind, you could say, and our mind. And as an image of God, what we understand about the universe from the tree of life, we equally mirrored understand about ourselves as a mirror, as a microcosm of that macrocosm, as above, so below. So the meditations on the tree of life evoke images in the mind that are analogous between creator and creation, between mind, capital N, and mind. God and man. So God made man in his image, and so what is symbolically relevant to man's body is equally relevant to God's, from noumena to phenomena, if you like, but it works both ways as well. So as we learn about the macro, we learn about the micro, and we use the diagram as a tool to do so. So the spiritual evolution of man is like a mirror image of the evolutionary processes of the cosmos. And so when we begin to look at the diagram, which we will very soon, we see that it unfolds from the top. The evolutionary process of man is mirrored with this, okay? It's there's a subconscious connection between man's soul and the world soul, or the image and the image creator. Okay, we share in those cycles and motions of the cosmos. So basically, as we learn about the cosmos, we learn about ourselves. It is the law of analogy, which is like the ultimate law, really, of occult philosophy, of the law of analogy, of analogous relationships. The difficulty then is in thinking about that which cannot be thought of, okay, as such. So thought needs to be left behind. Okay, if you get too caught up in rationale and reasoning, and what is this? It's literally a circle. It's not literally a circle. It's a symbol. The diagram is always going to be fighting against itself to define itself, because these aren't things you can go out and go to the shop and buy a Sephiroth. Okay, it's not a matter of mental explanation, but meditative contemplation on symbols, which unfold in that sense. It's quite pathic in that way. Okay, so I'll flip forward to the diagram just so you can see what I'm talking about. But so backwards from Kether. So this is almost before. This is like before the diagram, before the tree of life. Backwards from Kether, which is the top Sephiroth. So the circles, I will explain it as simply as I can. You're looking at the diagram on the left. The circles are, in plural, the Sephiroth. Singular, they are Sephirah. Okay, Sephirah for singular, and then Oth for plural. Kether is the first one. Everything else unfolds or overflows, in the words of Fortune, from Kether. But let's reel it back. Before Kether, you'll see that there are 3 dotted lines before it. These are the 3 veils of negative existence. These, for me, this is my own understanding in a way, and also in a way that Dion Fortune puts it across. These are like an admittance of the strange limitation for man in terms of his meditations on the symbols. Okay, the Qabalist begins, when they're drawing diagrammatically, from the first point within finite consciousness. Okay, so Kether, to quote, the most transcendent form of God that we can conceive, whose name is Ea, translated in the authorized version of the Bible as I am, or more explicitly, the self-existing one, pure being. Okay, so the important thing to understand there is the most transcendent form of God that we can conceive. Okay, so when we think about it in this way, okay, 3 veils of think about those words, 3 veils of negative existence. Okay, now these 3 veils have names. They are Ein, A-I-N, negativity, Ein Sof, the limitless, and Ein Sof Ah, the limitless light. And it's from the latter that Kether is then concentrated. But these layers, these 3 negative, the 3 negative veils of existence, Ein Sof Ah, mask the pure transcendent reality, that which we just will never be able to think of because of where we are within the cosmos. Okay, and when we relate this to scripture, just to perhaps anchor it, we can take a piece of scripture from Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, Ein, which is just pure negativity, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God, Ein Sof, moved upon the face of the waters. So Ein Sof there, the limitless, Spirit of God. And God said, let there be light, limitless light, Ein Sof Ah. And there was light, and God saw the light, and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now what's interesting about that, as a way just to understand this, is that when we look at it, the earth was without... So in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. God already is before he created heaven and the earth. He has to be, by the understanding of the scripture here. Okay, so in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth, but he was already there. Okay, for the creation to happen, he had to be there. The point there is understanding that without form and void, Ein, pure negativity, well, he was there before that. And then there is the Spirit of God, the limitless, and then he finally creates light, and from the light, then there is a crystallization of Kether. And to understand this crystallization, Dion Fortune gives us an image of put too much sugar, get a glass of water and put too much sugar in it, keep stirring till it dissolves. And when there's too much sugar that can't be taken in by the water, anyone who's done this will understand if you let the glass sit, eventually, if you keep watching it, the sugar will just slowly start to form again, because it can't be taken in. She says that's an image to meditate on to understand Kether. But the point of these veils of existence is to say it's only from Kether that we can begin to understand God. That is, as I said earlier, it is the I've lost the quote there. The veils of existence are masking the sort of the pure being. I mean, maybe if you're a Christian, you could say that would be the beatific vision. That would be like face to face. That would be the pure being. That's not the case with the tree of life. From these veils of existence, they're understood with scripture, crystallizes Kether, the first Sephiroth, and then that unfolds into something that we, if we really push ourselves, spiritually speaking, will be able to understand. So that brings us, I mean, the quotes are there on the former slide, but that does bring us to and I'll move my camera up to the top here so you can see these three peculiar things that we've got. So it brings us to the tree of life. Now we've got a firm foundation, we can actually start studying it. So Otzchim, Otzchim, which is Fortune's quite different transliteration of tree of life from the Hebrew. So it would either be Etzkaim or Etzkaim, but she transliterates it as Otzchim. Maybe someone can enlighten me as to why this is. I did look it up, couldn't find anything. Meaning the tree of life. We have Genesis 2:9, of course, from the Old Testament, referring to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, associated with wisdom, and after Adam and Eve are driven out, it is protected by a cherubim with a flaming sword. From Proverbs 15:4, a soothing tongue is a tree of life, but persevereness therein is a wound to the spirit. And this is relating to the tree of life. So, a soothing tongue is a tree of life. For me, to begin to understand that practical relationship with the tree of life, we can turn to someone such as Tomberg. And also this understanding of the eventual reality of the tree of life in the Old Testament, which is once Adam and Eve are driven out, the tree then becomes protected by a cherubim. Tomberg relates this, and he understands that the tree of life is such that it's not something for you to go grasp. You can't go up to the tree of life, tree of wisdom, and take something and go, right, that's mine. You have to be offered it. And it's in this way that the meditations and the meditations on symbols reveals itself, as opposed to like, I'm going to go grasp it. I'm going to grasp it, and it's mine. It's my piece of wisdom. It's ridiculous. Once again, I would argue that it's a pathic, open relationship where you meditate on it, and that sort of collective unconscious, in a Jungian sense, is already there to be unfolded to you and is slowly being elucidated throughout time. So, let's talk practically. It is a glyph, which in technical terms is a composite symbol. So it's a symbol made up of other symbols. Okay, so we can look at it there. There are 10 Sephiroth. Okay, you'll notice on there is one non-Sephiroth. I'll make that clear now that it's not a Sephiroth, with the dotted line, which is Darth. But exclude Darth for now. You see it just below Kether. Exclude that for now. The rest are the Sephiroth. Okay, Darth is not a Sephiroth. They are the 10 Sephiroth. They are 10 symbols on this composite symbol. The lines, or the two lines, parallel lines between them that you can see, the paths between them are literally that, paths. I haven't labelled the paths here because in the next talk I will focus more on what each Sephiroth means and, how do we get from 1 to 2? How do we get from 2 to 3? What does that path mean? Okay, here we're on about the structure. So It's a glyph. It's a symbol made up of symbols. It represents the cosmos, the above, in how it's structured. And it represents the soul of man in how it's structured. And those two things mirror each other. So when you find out one thing about one, you find out something else about the other. It's about their relationship as well. It's an arrangement of 10 circles in a certain pattern connected by lines. Now, you might ask why this pattern is the different patterns. There is different patterns, but this is the one that is most commonly used. The other ones aren't as often used. No need to get into that right now. The circles are the 10 holy Sephiroth. Sephiroth means emanation. They are illuminations of God's light. So when we think back to the third Ein Sof Ah, negative veil of existence, that was let there be light, the beginning of crystallization. So each one of these is an illumination of God's infinite light. 10 different channels of God's singular will, and the connecting lines are paths, which are 22 in number. Okay, so we have 10 Sephiroth, 22 paths, 32 as a total. Okay, what are Sephiroth then? Okay, so you can sort of start to think about that. Each one is we've had that first 3 negative veils of existence, and things we'll never know that. We can't know that because of our position in the universe as finite material beings on a certain plane, right? But we begin with Kepha. We might at one point maybe be able to understand that. That is the point where our finite consciousness can begin to understand things. That's where what we know begins to crystallize. So it's a beginning of God's light. Okay, so the light comes through, something begins to crystallize, and then eventually we get down to Malkuth, which is representative of the world of matter, and where we are, Earth. So it begins to unfold. So okay, begins to somewhat make sense there. So what is each one of these Sephiroth then? What is each one of these circles like? What is it? It's a phase of evolution. Okay, it's a symbol always for us, but it's a phase of evolution. The paths between the Sephiroth are phases of subjective consciousness, the soul's unfolding journey towards realization. Now, of course, we would begin at the bottom because we are at 10, so we'd have to go 10, 9, 10, 9, 8, 7, all the way up 5. Those paths, okay? The paths are the Sephiroth are objective, the paths are subjective. Sephiroth are objective, the paths are subjective. So it's our subjective relationship between that revealing of them to make our way and ascend, okay? Now, we'll be more on the strict layout itself soon, but there are 3 other things to tackle, which are actually to do with the macro structure of the Tree of Life before I get into the intricacies of the Tree of Life. I've put 2 other symbols here that you'll see, or 2, one diagram, one a symbol. The first one is 3 columns. Okay, so you could transpose 3 columns onto the Tree of Life. Okay, that's all these things are layered. But if I gave you that image, it's too much. Okay, so you see 3 columns here: severity, mildness, and mercy. Take the column severity and place it onto the left side of the Tree of Life, and you would have Bina, Gebra, and Hod on it. So they would represent severity. Take the mildness one, the middle pillar, the middle column. You might have heard that term before from Israel Regardie's books. Mildness then is in the middle. Kether, Darth, non-Sephiroth. Kether, Tiphareth, Yesod, Malkuth. Equilibrium between polarity. Take the right column, mercy, Chokmah, Chesed, Netzach. Okay? They're straight on there. So when you're moving between them, you're moving between polarity. You're moving between, you begin at equilibrium in a way, and then you move between, for instance, you say Malkuth to Yesod, and then to Hod, so severity, then you come across to Netzach. Now, why do you go across? Well, you look to the symbol on the right, which Dion Fortune calls the lightning flash, which is how, if we're going 1, 2, 3, that is how we're moving down, and then in a way moving up. Okay? And sometimes this is drawn as a snake along the paths. So when you look at the path, it's a snake winding its way up the Tree of Life. Okay, so Kether is the apex, it's the crown, at the top. When you think about a crown, another symbol for you to think about, it's called the crown. Kether means crown. Crown isn't the head itself. The crown is the higher mind. The crown is above the head. Kether is not spatial. It emanates from... I'll go through now to the main diagram, because I'm now going to start talking about Tree of Life and its structure, and then I'll flip back if we need. There's one more thing, actually. The other thing is this: the 4 worlds, and my camera's running away again. So, right, I'll go back just so we can get this right. We have the Tree of Life. Hopefully we understand just the structure and the very basics of what it is. The pillars, the 3 pillars, are then mapped onto it. So severity on the left, mildness on the middle, mercy on the right. And then the lightning glyph on the right is how the connections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. There's one further thing about the macro structure of the Tree of Life, and then we can finally start to look at it and understand it in more complexity. So, it is split into 4 worlds. We have Absoluth, which is the archetypal world, which is only Kether in this world, which is literally God. Okay. Then we have Briar, which is a creative world, which is Chokmah and Bina, archangels. But they act, they build, but it's from God. It's an overflowing of the light through things, a mediation and a crystallization. So, Atzla, just Kether. Briar, creative. Okay. Bina and Chokmah. And then Yetzirah is formative. Things are being formed. And that's all the other Sephiroth except Malkuth, which is right at the end, which is Azaya, material world, planets, elements, zodiac, etc. Okay? So 4 worlds as well. And equally, it is split into 3 triangles. So Kether, Chokmah, and Bina. So remember, that was Atzila and also the archangels. So this is the supernal world. It's a supernal triangle. You see a triangle at the top, 1, 2, 3. Then we have the ethical, which is 4, 5, 6, Chesed, Gebara, and Tipareth. And then we have the astral, which is 7, 8, 9, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And then as we remember, if we think supernal, ethical, and astral, Malkuth is just on its own because it's the material world. And now we can really begin to start to analyze the Tree of Life, finally, 42 minutes in. So, Kether at the top, the first Sephiroth, is not spatial. It emanates from the Ein Sof R, the limitless light, let there be light. It's a circle whose center is everywhere. That's the symbol to meditate on if you want to think about Kether, or think about that sugar which is suddenly reappearing in the glass of water. Kether is a circle whose center is everywhere. The Sephiroth are not, diagram. Once again, we're pushing up against diagrams because you look at it and go, right, it's at the top. No, its center is everywhere. The Sephiroth, even though diagrammatically, 2-dimensionally, they're stacked for our ease, because we have to understand this is a form of language. They're not stacked like a building. They are successive in that subjective sense, and they do develop successively, and yet are simultaneous in space. Okay. Each Sephiroth overflows from the previous into the other. You might be able to think of it in human terms as a form of spiritual entropy, where by the end, what do we have? We have this solid, form, but before that, it's getting denser, or if you go up, it's getting finer. We see this in Plato, we see this in Gurdjieff, we see this in Steiner. It's a descendance from the fine matter, if you want to put it that way, once again symbolically, through to dense matter. Okay, so if each Sephiroth overflows from the previous one, so this from the limitless light crystallizes this light, that then overflows into Chokmah. From Kether to Chokmah overflows, and Chokmah to Bina overflows. So each is reliant on the last. Okay, so it's an overflowing. It's an evolution from one to the other, downwards towards Earth. Therefore, we can understand that Kether would contain all the other Sephirah, and Chokmah would contain all the following 8, etc., etc. So, but each Sephirah only unfolds a single aspect, okay? The unmanifest flows via pressure, and this is, if we think about this flowing, Dion Fortune always liked to say, God is pressure. It's another symbol to think about from the overflowing of Kether. So 2 ways to think about Kether. Kether in relation to the 3 negative veils is God is pressure. And it's really great to read this alongside Cosmic Doctrine, by the way. And another thing is a circle whose center is everywhere. Okay, so Kether overflows, and once the first evolutionary process has reached all possible combinations of permutations, a new form of existence, a new state, more organized form of existence begins. Now, one way this is also read, this how the structure of the tree of life is formed in a way that we can understand, is to do with polarity, and it's in Lon Milo Duquette's book, The Chicken Qabalah. So if you have one thing, it can't understand itself without something it isn't. So 1 begets 2, because 1 cannot be anything without a polarity, a comparison. So 1 begets 2. But those 2 things together can't understand each other without a third. So a third comes into existence. So we have 1, 2, and 3. But those 3 then become a 1, which in turn begets the second triangle, which also needs its third, and begets the third triangle. And then Malkuth for Duquette is just hanging on at the end. That's another way to think about it, okay? So, once all possible permutations of the evolution of Kether have been formed into the existence that they have, a new form of evolution begins. And so Kether overflows into Chokmah. And then we have 1 and 2. Kether as the first swirlings. You can think of Lucretius, and something just begins to swerve. And then it goes into Chokmah, and Chokmah overflows into Binah. Now, these first 3 are called, as I said, and you'll see on the left, the supernal triangle, and are separated by an abyss, something human consciousness cannot cross, between the supernal and the ethical. Okay, so Kether, the crown, the higher mind, Chokmah, wisdom, and Binah, understanding. Okay, and we'll find that amidst the abyss, the way to cross the abyss is this peculiar non-Sephirah, Darth. And Darth means knowledge. And that, crossing the abyss, how do I do that? I'll leave that to you to figure out. It's rather mysterious, and it's not represented by a glyph, like it shouldn't be there. But most people represent it like this, just to be like, look, it's there, but it's not there. Okay. For Fortune, Darth is realization. It's straddling the abyss. Okay, it's between the ethical and the supernal. But we have Kether, crown, wisdom, and understanding. Kether, Chokmah, Binah. Okay. The supernal triangle is the crown, the wisdom, and understanding, and in a way knowledge, and it's representative of the head. Okay, but the crown rests on top of the head, as I've said, and it's not the head itself. It's the raw material of existence and consciousness, yet not being itself. Anyone who's performed the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram will, or the Qabbalistic cross, will understand some sort of relation to practice there of bringing down light. Chokmah and Binah then, so Chokmah 2, Binah 3, are the supernal father and the supernal mother. Kether differentiates into male and female polarities. Many would read this in a Hebraic sense in relation to the name of God, which is Elohim, which has has a sort of a fluxing gender definition. So Binah is under, go back to our pillars. Binah on the left is under severity, and Chokmah is under mercy. And so we have the supernal father is under mercy, and the mother is under severity, and Kether is under mildness, the column of equilibrium. These two pillars stand at the entrance to Solomon's temple. So a candidate in many initiation ceremonies is to walk between the pillars upon the middle path, the path of equilibrium between polarity. Okay, so Chokhmah and Bina are also seen as force and form, two units needed for manifestation. So when we're talking about the supernal triangle, 1, 2, and 3, Kether, Chokhmah, Bina, we're talking about the crown, which is just this pure crystallization of God's light. And we're also talking about force and form. What is needed to manifest anything at all. So Kether from the archetypal world, Atziluth, if you remember the 4 worlds, pure energy, pure light, through to Briar, the creative world, force and form of the archangels, and then we go through. Okay, so they begin the polarity that's needed for manifestation. You need something to have that polarity to begin creation. Okay, Darth is produced from their conjunction. It has no angelic host or deity assigned, as all other Sephiroth do, another correspondence. As such, through knowledge, Darth, wisdom comes to be combined with understanding. It's part of the middle pillar, and it's, as you can see, it's on the way from 6 to 1, and we'll get to what 6 is soon enough. So Darth knowledge is understood as the inner path relating to its position from Kether, Darth, Tiphareth, Yesod, Malkuth. Equilibrium. Okay? The midpoint between polarities, severity, mercy. So then we go through to the second triangle. And these triangles are often named differently, by the way. The second triangle is formed of Chesed, Geburah, and Tiphareth. Okay, so Chesed means love or mercy. Geburah means strength, so polarity there again, mercy and strength. And Tiphareth means beauty. Now, for fortune, she understands it this way. Tiphareth is the Sephiroth. Tiphareth is the singular Sephiroth of sacrificed gods. And so for fortune, it is the Christ center. This is where Christ is on the tree of life. And we can really understand that as Christ becomes incarnate, like he has a, he's on the, in a way, he's like between the ethical and the astral, but he's God and man, and he's of sacrificed gods. But also you can think about the fact that before you get to Kether, you're on the earth, then you go through Yesod, and then Tiphareth, which is the Christ center, through knowledge to God. Okay? So what is behind the supernal triangle, transcendent, gives it meaning. So what's behind the supernal triangle, which is all that limitless light and creation, gives it meaning. Whereas the second triangle, the ethical triangle, it's what it issues forth wherein it finds its meaning. So the supernal triangle is creative forces with respect to that pure substance of the universe. The second triangle, then, we're moving through further and further through crystallization. The second triangle is governing forces, evolving life. Okay. The Chesed is the fourth, is a wise king fostering industry, civilization, building. Whereas Geburah is a warrior king who leads in battle and defense. He's also represented by Mars in conquest. And Tiphareth is the savior and sacrifice that brings the two into equilibrium. So we have the wise king and the battle. And if you want to think about it in terms of Christ, the wise king who came with a sword. So behind Tiphareth is Parakef. It's the veil of the temple, the second triangle equivalent to the abyss. Once again, it's a chasm of consciousness. There's these constant leaps between these places. With Tiphareth, once again, being the highest sphere normal consciousness can ascend to within this place. Okay. So when we think back to Scripture, once again, to keep this in those sorts of fortune and night bounds, show us the Father, Jesus replied. He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. And herein we find that Kether is reflected on that equilibrium pillar into Tiphareth, Father through me. Earth, Yesod, Christ, the Father. Okay. Then we go down to the third triangle, the astral triangle, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. This is an exact, diagrammatically, it's an exact replica of the second triangle, right? It's a downward triangle. Netzach is victory, Venus, and try and remember where they are on the pillars. So severity, equilibrium, mercy. And so Netzach would be mercy, Hod is severity, is glory, and Yesod is the moon. Foundation. Okay, so Kether is the Father, Tifereth is the Son, and Yesod is the Holy Spirit, that which enlightens and ascents, begins the ascent. So we're on the earth, we begin a relationship with the Holy Spirit, an internal relationship with Christ, then there's knowledge, that peculiar Darth, and then God the Father. Now this of course can be transposed onto anyone's, it's been completely altered and changed by many people. So once again, I'm just trying to stay within the bounds of fortune to help an understanding via some clear system. Okay, and then finally we've gone through. So yeah, we have the supernal triangle, those manifesting forces, then laws, regulations, and then victory, glory, and the moon. Then finally we have Malkuth, where one begins their ascent, the kingdom of earth. The only thing in Isaiah, the material plane, it's cut off from the tree. Why do we think that is? It's cut off from the tree due to the fall. Hence it's fallen down, and we have to, because of the fall, we have to sort of push through. And anyone know Yesod, the moon, it's in relationship with the moon. Anyone who understands their esoteric or occult philosophy in relation to the moon will know of the moon as this figure of a symbol of our most base desires. So we can go back to the Bible and think about the image of Mary stood on the moon with a crown above her head, 12 stars at her feet. It's a representation, both astrologically, it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke about Hellenistic astrology, but it's also a reference to the Qabalah of the overcoming of base desires as to begin that ascent, and the 12 stars being that anyone can do it, any sign of the zodiac. And so what we see here is you begin on Earth. All right, well, how do I begin my ascent? We got to go through the moon. What's the moon? It's your base desires. And then you begin your ascent. And so Malkuth abuts upon the hells of the averse Sephiroth, the Klippoth, or evil demons. It is the firmament whereby Elohim separated the supernal waters of Bina from the infernal waters of Leviathan. Okay? Now, I may do a separate talk on the Klippoth, I don't know, or the Klippoth, however it's pronounced. Basically, they're like the inverse, they're the dark stuff. When the Tree of Life was evolving, certain unbalanced emanations to place before equilibrium amidst the whole Tree of Life found. So before there was equilibrium, countenance, behold not countenance, and the kings of ancient time were dead, and their crowns were found no more, and the earth was desolate. This is from a book of concealed mystery about the Tree of Life. Okay, so the Klippoth is the unbalanced emanations of evolution before it came to fully be structured, and you can think of them in a demonic sense. But I'm not going to get too much into that here because I'm just focusing on the structure. So now, when we think about this notion of us moving up the tree, if we're to use the tree subjectively, practical use, we'd actually back ourselves into it. So if you think about it there, you wouldn't go in head on, you'd back the body into it. So you'd turn around, and so your left arm would be on Chokma, Chesed, and Netzach. Okay? And then that image is then applied over the human body. The pillar of severity, which is when we're looking at it here on the left, is negative and feminine, and the pillar of mercy is positive and masculine. The negative breaks down, positive builds up. The two pillars are active and passive, positive and negative, concrete and free moving. They are polarity, and our purpose in a way is to find that middle pillar, that middle equilibrium. Okay. Descension from the top is the movement from finer to denser matter. Triangle 1 is supernal, or in a way intellectual. The crown, the higher intellect above the head. 2 is moral or ethical. 3 is material, though Thought-Tune calls Malkuth material, and then the third triangle magical or astral, which I think is more apt. So Malkuth is the only purely material, it's earth, and then you move through the astral or the magical. You're building yourself, then through the moral, and then into the purely intellectual. Okay, and then of course also moving through the 4 levels as you do that. And that really is the basic structure of of the Tree of Life before you start going, right, what exactly is Kether and how do I begin to use it? What are the correspondences, which I'll get to in the next talk. So the one thing I haven't mentioned here is the paths. I haven't even labeled them here because I was dealing with the basic structure. The paths are representations of the equilibrium between two connected Sephiroths. And the whole thing's about equilibrium polarity, really. But the paths, of course, once you start to understand about one Sephiroth and the other Sephiroth that's connected to, you can say, I can sort of understand what the path would be now between these. Though Fortune did intend to write a book on these, but there's just some papers left. And the Sephiroth evolution is composed of the lightning flash, which goes downwards, and it's a bit more complex and spirals down and winds around things. And the 22 paths are united by a serpent of wisdom looping from one to the other upward for the subjective appreciation. Okay. And that is it. I will get into the paths and the separate Sephiroth in the next talk, but for now, that's the structure. That's how it's formed. That's what it is. It's this dissension of evolution beyond which there is three veils, which we just can't know, from Kether overflowing into each Sephiroth down to Malkuth, and then the ascent is a case of meditations on the paths and on the Sephiroth themselves, winding upwards with these three triangles, with these four levels, with the three pillars. That is the basic structural foundation of the diagram, which is the Tree of Life. The next talk will be about, probably be a bit longer actually, because I'm going to look at the correspondences, look at what each Sephiroth means, so Kether, Chokmah, Bina, and then also begin to, I'll probably begin from Malkuth, so we can begin upwards. But for instance, if I begin with Malkuth, I'll go, okay, well, we move from Malkuth to Yesod, let's start on that path, and we can look at the paths and the leaps between them as we go. But I hope you can understand from this, when you look at it now, you can understand it just a little bit better, and you have that structure to work with if you then want to go play around with it yourself. But thanks all for listening, and see you all hopefully in the second part.